What's up guys, this is Evan with Backwoods Adventure Mods. Today we're going to walk through the installation of our 2020 to current Ford Transit Scout front bumper. Now it will fit all the 2020 to current Transits regardless of whether it's all-wheel drive or two-wheel drive. The wheelbase doesn't matter, the body length or height doesn't matter which trim package it is. All it does is replace this lower section of plastic. It's compatible with the adaptive cruise control and the parking sensors, and if you don't have those systems, there's a delete that'll come with it for either one. Now it has some similarities with our full replacement. It uses the exact same mounting location, style, and hardware, so it's got the same strength as our full replacement. Houses up to a 12,000 pound winch, has the 2-inch receiver tube, it has the 3/4 inch shackle mounts for recovery points, but the difference is that it looks much more integrated into the van. And for those of you that like to keep the outer plastic, maybe you have some fog lights that you'd like to retain, this is a more slim integrated look. Let's get started. Here's a quick note before we actually start the install as to what's in the box. So the bumper will arrive in this nice big box here. Inside is just the bumper and this hardware box. You'll have a hardware kit that we'll go over a little bit later. You'll have this card that you can scan to see the instructions, which, since you're watching this video, you've probably already done that. These are some spacers that will come into play a little bit later on. These are some brackets to help mount the original plastic back to the bumper. And this bracket is if you have the active cruise control. And if you don't, you'll just omit this and use this as a cover plate. Okay, so all this has to come off in order to get the steel cross member, what passes for the bumper. We're going to call it a bumper for now. To get it off, we have to take off the upper bumper and the lower bumper cover and the grill. So we're just going to start at the top and work our way around the perimeter. And it's mostly these little plastic push pins that you can use your trim tool for. And then once you get to the bottom side, you're going to need a 10mm. And there's one that's way up in there you'll need an extension for, a pretty long extension, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But I'm just going to get started working my way around. One you'll need an extension for is way up in here. I'll come back to that one. I think the owner of this van added these screws here. I've never seen one with these screws before. We're going to drop this lower splash shield. Once the last bolt is out, especially the one way up in there, there's a little clip. We're not going to reuse this, so you can just pop it down. Don't forget to disconnect the wiring harness. Let's zoom in on that. In order to take this off, we're going to have to pull this fender flare off, and we're going to save it for later, and we're going to try to save the clips and not break them. So on this lower part, there are 3 tabs. Once you've got your wheel liner pulled back, at least for these lower 2, you can find the tab and squeeze the middle of it down towards the tire. The top one you can't reach, so you just have to pop it out. Here's the tabs. I was reaching back and pushing in on the middle part as I pulled outwards. Up here you have 3 of the plastic push-in things, and we're going to try to be very careful not to break the tabs on them. This one actually already popped out, so we're going to carefully try to get this middle one. And this last one, it didn't pop out, it just slid straight off the back. I didn't even mean to do that, it just slid off as I did. So that worked out great. There are 4 really big clips holding this thing on. There's one about here, and then there's one somewhere in this general area. So I'll show you on this one. If you look in there, so I was lifting up on this piece so that this piece can come out. We'll do the same over here, and then we'll try to get into the one that's under the headlight. There's a hidden tin inside here. You can see the threads of it sticking forward here, but you have to access it from inside here. All right, we moved over here to the passenger side because I forgot to get a video of the other side. So once you've got this part loose, there are 3 little tabs in here. Usually the bottom ones will kind of pop out, but for the top one we're going to use a tool kind of like this to push in on the little tab so you don't just have to yank. You can kind of see what we're dealing with. This little slot here was secured by a tab that's on a fixed piece inside there. So if you, with the tab still in there, if you push back with a tool like this, be very careful not to scratch the paint. But you can't see the tab now because it's in there, but we're going to basically do this on the 2 remaining ones. I don't think you're going to be able to see this last clip until we get it off, but it's right behind here. So I'm going to reach in, and just like we did on the top one, I'm just going to lift up on the surrounding part. Lift up, and then it should pop. There we go. So you can see in here now, it was this clipped into where my finger is, and I just lift it up like that to get it to pop off. Probably if you have the camera or sensors, there are going to be some wires. So grab somebody to hold it so it doesn't fall, and then unclip any wires or looks like windshield washer fluid tubes as well for the little washer that's built in. All right, we're going to disconnect these 2 plugs for the harness. This little brown one should be for the camera. Squeeze the tab. There we go. And then the back side of this clip for your fog lights and sensors. And it has a Christmas tree over here. I'm going to pop it out of. We'll set this aside for now. Next, we're going to take off these little plastic air deflectors, and then this lower, I guess you'd call it a bumper. Take off this lower bumper unit, and then it's on to the fun part. So we'll take this wiring harness off of this. This is a harness for the active cruise control module, which is what this is. And we're going to fit this behind the new bumper. We'll pop this one off too. Then lastly, there's a little temperature sensor as a part of this harness pinched onto the edge of the metal. We'll pop it off. We'll put this back in the new bumper later. For now, I'm going to disconnect this active cruise control module. Also, before you do this, before you do any electrical work on a vehicle, always disconnect the battery. While we're taking these bolts out, we're going to go ahead and take the top and bottom out. Don't worry about this bumper falling because it's spot welded in. Go ahead and get the bolts out while you're doing it. And I'm going to take this tin out just to get the washer reservoir bracket out of our way. Then we're going to take all 8 13mm bolts out per side. All the bolts are out of these 2 pieces. The lower one is just hanging by this plastic part that's connected to the upper one. And we're going to take out these 4 8mm on the inside here. Once these come out, we'll be able to drop that lower bumper off. All right, so this just fell off once we took our last little bolt out. I forgot to mention that I took this out a little earlier. It was in the way and it gets discarded. It's just a 10mm right there into the side, and then this was popped into that hole. So you pull out the tin, pop it out, and toss it. And then we're gonna take this air dam off as well. It's got little clips on the bottom that you just pull down, and then 4 Christmas trees that you have to get kind of from up above. We're gonna take this active cruise sensor off and set it aside very carefully. They say to throw it out and buy a new one if you drop it, so we're always very careful with it. And we want to get it off before we start hammering on this piece to take it off. Got a T25, take this off. The 2 on the bottom are an 8mm socket. Now this is held in place by 2 small Christmas trees. They should just pull out. We'll set this aside. Now for the good part. Now we have to cut these spot welds to get this bumper to come off the rest of the way. So they put a spot weld on the outside and inside of the frame rail, centered between these bolt holes. You can see that little circle right there. There's 1 on each side, so there's 4 total. We have to get through 3 of them, and we can kind of twist the last one off real gently. There's a few different ways you can do this. I've had people slice this bumper here to get the bulk of it out of the way, and they will drill the spot weld. That's not a bad way to do it. I've seen people grind the spot welds You can use a very small, like a 1-inch wide belt sander and grind it out. You can try to break it completely with a chisel. My favorite way is a combination of the chisel and a sawzall. So I like to drive a chisel in between the frame mount and the bumper just far enough to get a sawzall blade in, then I cut through the sawzall. So that's the method I'm going to do today. We're just left with this last one. Instead of getting in there with a saw, we can just kind of work it up and down and it'll pop off. Last step, we're going to grind off any sharp spots from breaking those welds. There weren't very many on this one. And then we're going to hit it with a little paint just so it doesn't rust. We're gonna go to lunch, let this dry. When we come back, it's time to start putting the good stuff on the van. All right, we're back and the paint's dry. I've got the hardware all laid out from the hardware kit. Before we stick the bumper on, you'll wanna use this little spacer plate to go here, because what you'll notice is that this bottom, this kicker brace, sticks out a little bit further than the main frame rail, so we put this piece to make them nice and flush. So when I'm doing this install by myself, I'll use the top 4 bolts to hang this spacer plate on, and I'll do this on both sides, and then I'll just hang the bumper on these bolts and get a nut started so it can't fall. Okay, now that it's safe, I'm going to put all the bolts in and install them properly with washers. So for every bolt, we're going to do a flat washer, a lock washer, and a nut. There's also a flat washer on the back side. Don't forget to put your reservoir bracket back on. Okay, now we're going to center this thing left to right, and you can kind of look at these frame ends. This one needs to shift over that way, maybe a 1/4 inch or a little less. I think I like it. We're going to tighten these down and then we'll go through the process of cutting the factory plastic bumper. These are 7/16 bolts, and since they're 7/16 in grade 8, they're a bit of an odd one. The bolt head is a 5/8 and the nut is an 11/16. It's the only one that I've ever used that's like that. Normally they match. So I'm just going to run through and crank all these down. All right, now before we put the plastic bumper cover back on, this is the time to install any accessories. So we're not doing a winch today, but this is the proper time to do it. You'll set the winch in through here, and there's access holes cut in the bottom of this bumper so you can get your socket to the 4 bolts. We provided some tabs. I know you can't see them very well, but all along the top, they're wiring tabs. So your wiring harness, you'll tuck up to the top and zip tie to those tabs. If you had parking sensors, make sure you put them back in the same location, in the same orientation, and using the included sensor housings. This van doesn't have parking sensors up front, so we're going to use our parking sensor deletes, which we've got 2 versions. There's a plastic snap-in version that should be coming out soon, but for now we've got these really neat little machined pieces that will just center themselves in this hole. Then we use a fender washer and a lock washer behind it and a nut. The end of this is machined for a 5/32, so this is how you keep it from turning while you tighten it down. Then the last thing we're going to do is put our active cruise control sensor back in. This will pop off of these studs that it's on, all 3 studs. Then this bracket, the sensor will bolt to the front of this bracket, and then that will bolt underneath using these 2 bolt holes, and just adjust it as far forward as you can until it comes into contact with the back inside of the bumper. I should have led with this actually. Before you bolt that part in, go ahead and bolt this shield in. This simulates the plastic that's in the original bumper. So it's going to go there first. Then you'll bolt your sensor assembly in. Then lastly, these little brackets hold the original bumper cover in place. So for now we have a slot and we'll use a nut and a bolt. In the near future, you'll probably see a small design change where this will accept the factory clip nut that was in the factory bumper so you can retain some factory hardware. But anyway, today you'll see us using a nut and bolt. All right, let's do it. We're going to leave these loose for now for adjustment purposes. I'm going to tighten them down, but not so much that I can't move them. All right guys, it's cut time. Now this one couldn't be easier. We're just going to take out this chunk, and that's from here all the way back around to the other point there. There's no marking, no measuring. We're just going to cut at this first little sharp inside bend here all the way around. You can take off this little inspection plate and cut all the way around. This is the tool to do it with. If you don't have one of these, they're seriously about $10 or just under at Harbor Freight for a corded version. I highly recommend it. You can do this with a body saw. You can do it with a grinder, a die grinder. There's lots of different tools you can do it with, but this, in my opinion, is by far the easiest. So let's get started. So I'm going to plunge cut in, work my way up to this line, and then just carefully and slowly follow it as close as I can. Once this cools, I'm going to go around with a blade and just knock this off. If there's any spots that need to be sanded, do that now before you put it on. But I like to just take a pocket knife or a simple blade and run around the edge and clean all this excess melted plastic off. All right, we've made our cut, cleaned it up. It's time for a test fit. I'm just going to set it in place, make sure that I like the way it looks, make sure the bumper seems centered, and I'm going to check that I like the location of these tabs where I had them. Then we'll pull it back off and finish our wiring connections. Okay, I like that. If this is the first one you've done, I recommend snapping in a couple of the snaps just to make sure. I've done a few so I can kind of eyeball it, but those 4 main snaps, it wouldn't hurt to pop them in. That way you know exactly what to look for. All right, so the last thing we want to do before we put this on is make our wiring connections. So this van just has the active cruise control module, so we're going to zip tie it to these zip tie tabs that are under here. We've got a wiring pass-through hole so everything can stay nice and clean behind the bumper. So we're going to plug that in. Then this air temperature sensor, we're going to zip tie it up just in front of one of these airflow holes. By this, there's a tab right there, just about in line with this. So we're going to zip tie all that together in that general area and then zip tie it up to these tabs. All right, time to put it on. Now we're just worried about getting these 4 big clips, and then we'll hook the ones around under the headlights, and then it's stuck there. Then we'll work on putting hardware in. Watch this little wiring harness, it likes to get stuck back there. All right, time to put some hardware in. Okay, so I didn't mention this earlier, but we're going to take these little clip nuts off of the factory bumper and put them on our angled brackets that we put behind the bumper in our test fit. So just grab a small screwdriver or something, lift off, and push it out this way. Then make sure this long part that sticks out is going towards the back. I'm going to pop it down over the top of our little bracket there. I'm going to thread this in. These are the factory bolts that went in that location. Next, we're going to drill out 2 little holes in the plastic to line up with these ears on the bumper. The bottom of this bumper has a little ear welded on each side with a 1/4 inch hole in it. We're going to mark the plastic from inside through that hole, and then we'll bend it down and drill it. All right, same thing on the other side. Okay, underneath the passenger side, we're going to plug the wiring back in. There we go. Then we're going to put our bolts in here and on the other side. Then we'll go back up top. All right, a couple things to do over here. We're going to put this hidden tin back in here. Tighten it down. Then we're going to tuck this wheel liner back in here. It goes in between this inner brace and the outer part of the bumper. So you can see there's the threaded part here. So we're going to slip this in between those 2 layers. Next, we're going to reinstall our fender flares. Same thing on the other side. All right, back up top, we're going to put in our 10mm bolts and our little push pins, and then we'll be done. All right, that wraps it up. Just make sure you've gone back through and checked that all your wiring connections are plugged back in, all your bolts are tight, and the fitment is where you want it. And that's it. That concludes the installation of our 2022 current Ford Transit Scout bumper. If you guys have any more questions, please reach out to us at backwoodsadventuremods.com. Thanks for watching.